But really, are credentials that important? For example, Bill Gates, who helped to co-found Microsoft, left college after one semester. Sure, you'll have a Mark Zuckerberg who gets a little farther along, but still, think about other people who are successful who've not needed to get a college degree. People like a Steve Jobs or a Lady Gaga. While credentialing does make things easier for society, it doesn't mean that credentialing is in fact essential. If you look at those people and thousands, millions of others who use a kind of entrepreneurial approach to life, you'll find that they succeed. Maybe then the benefit of credentialing is not so much that it is necessary, but it ends up being very useful for being able to accomplish certain kinds of things. So sociology therefore might ask, what is the logic of pursuing the action of going to school versus not going to school? Is it a difference between insight or managing workflow? That'll depend. One of the ways to approach the idea of credentialing and education more broadly is to consider it from a larger context. Think of education, higher ed, as a social institution. The example here being Bridgewater State University. Now, what's meant by a social institution? Well, you could say something simple like it's a place that generates paper, because, and this is typically the case in May, you see a bunch of people walking away from the campus with a diploma in hand. So is that all it is? A place where you set up a particular ceremony, people go and get diplomas, and that's it for the day? Obviously, it's a lot more than that. The definition that's offered in our text talks about a social institution as a complex group or organization. These groups have interdependent relationships, and that the sum of these relationships mean that you end up seeing an organization that performs a social role and that perpetuates itself, is able to sustain its experience. Sure, you're here for a class this semester, but Bridgewater State in one form or another has been around for well over a century. Who knows what it's going to be like in the future? I mean, after all, Bridgewater State University is a fairly new designation, 3-4 years at the most. Before that, it was Bridgewater State College. Well, what's the difference? Some would argue that it's little more than changing the sign on the green before Boyden Hall, changing the letterhead. We didn't even see that the email address changed. But there's clearly much more than that. A university is a place that is different from a college because it ends up awarding graduate degrees. So at Bridgewater, besides getting your undergraduate degree, you can end up getting a master's in quite a few different subjects. In that respect, Bridgewater State is not just an institution that perpetuated itself, but, to use a cliche, ended up growing or changing. That may be very true for many social institutions, that they have a certain enduring quality to them that allows them to sustain themselves over time. What then makes up a social institution? Well, I talked about the way in which it involved groups. But if you think about it, social institutions, at least the kind that we have in our society, are contingent on a number of things. For example, the use of English as a language. Not all social institutions in the United States require you to use English, but probably most of them do. Language, therefore, is an important precondition for the creation of a social institution. How about law? Law will end up being the most formal kinds of rules for organizations to function, for individuals to be able to sustain themselves. So we'll want some way in which this organization complies with the requirements of the law. More significantly, at least when it comes to the social institution of higher education, we'll see that the law requires certain things exist at this particular kind of institution, for it to validly hold itself out as a university that grants diplomas which will be recognized as appropriate markers or badges of the success of people who've gone through the programs here. We'll end up finding, too, that this is an institution that is an employer. So how does an institution like this end up functioning? Look at the different ways in which people can work here. There are people who work here through work-study. There are people who work here through on a part-time basis. And in that respect, they may end up fulfilling an administrative function. Of course, we have full-time administrators. But think about people like myself, the faculty and the librarians. You'll have that those individuals also break down into full-time and part-time. And amongst other things, and I think this will come as no surprise to you, that when you look at the costs associated with full-time versus part-time faculty, it's cheaper to hire part-time faculty. They get paid per course. They may not have the kind of benefits that you would expect of a full-time faculty. But of course, full-time faculty will do more. There will be group work. There will be advising. There will be participation on committees, not just as an example of group work, but a very specialized and necessary form of group dedicated to the continued existence of the institution. Let me pause here before we go into the more formal aspects of sociology and allow you to perhaps think back on some of the points that I've raised here.